a nation on the brink of collapse, a leader seized from under the very noses of his protectors, and a world watching with bated breath. Nicolás Maduro, once the iron-fisted ruler of Venezuela, now paraded in handcuffs. He faces charges that threaten to unravel everything he's built. But how did we get here? How did the once unshakable foundations of Venezuela's government begin to crack? And more importantly, what happens next? In this pivotal moment, the unraveling of Venezuela's power structure raises more questions than answers. We stand at the crossroads of history. The outcome of this crisis is poised to shape not only Venezuela's future, but the geopolitical landscape for years to come. This is not just the story of a president who lost control. It's the story of a nation where the balance of power has shifted possibly for good. Let's dive into the core of this crisis. The US delivers a strike that could alter the course of Venezuelan politics forever. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's first break down the events that have brought Venezuela to this critical juncture. The world's eyes are fixed on Venezuela. But this crisis didn't begin overnight. It's been years in the making. Maduro's rise to power wasn't without controversy. He inherited a divided country, plagued by economic instability and political unrest. But he consolidated his power through alliances, both within his government and with foreign partners. However, behind the scenes, Venezuela was crumbling. The economy faltered under plummeting oil prices. Inflation soared, and basic goods became scarce. The people suffered as government policies pushed the nation to the edge. But what's truly at the heart of this crisis is control. Maduro controlled the narrative, the military, and the economy. His grip seemed unbreakable. But all of that changed when the United States intervened. Now, with Maduro gone, the world is waiting to see what happens next. To understand the significance of this moment, we need to look at the history that led us here. How did Venezuela arrive at this breaking point? Venezuela's crisis has deep roots. To truly understand this moment, we must look back. Venezuela was once the richest country in Latin America. Oil was its lifeblood. It had the world's largest oil reserves. This wealth fueled a prosperous economy. But that prosperity began to fade. The government under Hugo Chavez nationalized the oil industry. Chavez, a populist leader, focused on social programs that gained him massive support. Yet, these policies also strained the country's finances. Maduro, Chavez's successor, inherited a nation on the brink. Oil prices were high when he took office, but the economic model built on oil exports was unsustainable. When oil prices collapsed, the country's economy spiraled. Hyperinflation hit, Venezuela's middle class vanished. People were forced into poverty, yet Maduro's response was to cling to power even as the country burned. He made alliances with Cuba, Russia, and China, hoping to secure his position, but none of this could stop the inevitable collapse. The story doesn't end with economic failure. It escalated with a sudden crisis, an event that shook the nation to its core. The situation in Venezuela reached a boiling point. In a move that shocked the world, the United States seized Maduro. U.S. forces stormed Caracas, capturing the president in a dramatic raid. This was no ordinary military operation. It was a bold, calculated strike aimed at dismantling Maduro's regime. Maduro's honor guard, once thought to be impenetrable, failed to protect him. It was a humiliating defeat for the Venezuelan government. Casualties were high. Dozens of Venezuelan soldiers were killed, including many from Maduro's elite guard. Cuban nationals embedded in the guard also lost their lives in the raid. This wasn't just a military failure, it was a symbol of the government's crumbling power. For Maduro, this was a disaster. But for the US, it was a significant victory. With Maduro captured, the US aimed to destabilize Venezuela's government and take control. The world was watching. What would happen next? Could the interim government hold on to power, or was Venezuela's future already sealed? To understand why this happened, we must examine the hidden mechanisms of Venezuela's system. What allowed such a monumental failure to unfold? The Venezuelan system was built on layers of secrecy, control, and manipulation. At the heart of it all, the military played a central role. The honor guard that failed Maduro was just one part of a much larger network of power. Behind the scenes, the DGCIM, the Directorate General of Military Counterintelligence, operated with impunity. This was a force that stifled dissent and ensured that Maduro's grip on power remained unchallenged. The DGCIM was notorious for its human rights violations, often using torture, fear, and intimidation to control opposition. The country's military leaders, like General Marcano Tabata, held immense power. Marcano Tabata was not just responsible for protecting the president, he also led the DGCIM, overseeing the repression of political enemies. Yet despite the military's dominance, it was still vulnerable. When the US forces struck, even the most powerful military officers couldn't protect their leader. What does this tell us about Venezuela's military structure? It shows a system built on control, but one that ultimately lacked the stability needed to withstand external threats. But this failure wasn't the end of the story. The crisis was far from over. Another wave of tension was just beginning to rise. As the dust settled from the US raid, tensions inside Venezuela reached a fever pitch. The interim government, led by Delcy Rodriguez, faced its first major test. Rodriguez, sworn in by a loyalist-dominated National Assembly, was now tasked with navigating the country through uncharted waters. But her path was not clear. Rodriguez had inherited a nation torn apart by years of economic collapse and political turmoil. The pressure was immense. On one hand, she had to deal with the fallout from Maduro's capture. On the other, the US was waiting for her to comply with their demands. Rodriguez's stance shifted between defiance and diplomacy. She denounced Maduro's seizure as an illegal kidnapping. Yet, she also invited the US to collaborate on a cooperative agenda. This balancing act was delicate, with her every move scrutinized both at home and abroad. The cracks in the government were starting to show. Support for Rodriguez was fragile. Her ability to hold power was questioned, especially as key figures in the military and political spheres could turn on her at any moment. The looming threat of another US strike added to the pressure. With the interim president facing these challenges, the consequences were being felt by the Venezuelan people. But how did this crisis affect them directly? As the political elite struggled for control, the people of Venezuela were caught in the middle. For them, the crisis wasn't just about power struggles or international diplomacy. It was about survival. The economic collapse had already pushed millions into poverty. Basic necessities, food, medicine, and clean water were scarce. Inflation was through the roof, making daily life unbearable for most. Now, with Maduro's capture and the interim government taking charge, uncertainty reigned. Would the interim government be able to improve their situation, or would things get worse? Rodriguez's promises of cooperation with the US gave little comfort to those suffering. Many Venezuelans feared that this would only deepen their dependence on foreign powers. But worse still was the fear that the military, now fractured, might turn on the population. Could another wave of violence be on the horizon? The Venezuelan people were trapped in a limbo, uncertain of what tomorrow would bring. The future seemed bleak, and hope was in short supply. His crisis is not just a political one, it's deeply personal for millions of Venezuelans. It's time we ask, what will become of the people who have borne the weight of this disaster? But this crisis doesn't just impact Venezuela. It's having ripple effects on the global stage with geopolitical consequences that extend far beyond the region. Venezuela's crisis is not contained within its borders. It's sending shockwaves throughout the world. The US has made its position clear. This is a geopolitical battle with global implications. Venezuela's oil reserves, the largest in the world, have been at the center of this conflict. Control of these resources could shift the balance of power in the region and even beyond. The US has made it clear that it wants a piece of this vast wealth, threatening to take up to 50 million barrels of oil. The geopolitical ramifications don't end there. Venezuela has long been allied with Cuba, Russia, and China. These countries have provided crucial support, both economically and militarily, to the Maduro regime. Now, with the US taking action, these alliances are being tested. Cuba, for example, mourns the loss of its nationals killed in the US raid, many of whom were embedded in Venezuela's honor guard. As the US strengthens its position, China and Russia watch closely. Their interests in Venezuela are tied to their larger strategic goals in Latin America. A shift in Venezuela's power could have far-reaching consequences for their influence in the region. This is no longer just a domestic crisis. It's a global one, with the potential to reshape international alliances and rivalries. As the global stakes continue to rise, we must ask, what will the future hold for Venezuela? Will it stabilize, or will it spiral further into chaos? Let's explore three possible scenarios for the future. What does the future hold for Venezuela? As the country stands at a crossroads, there are three possible paths ahead. Each carries its own set of risks and rewards. Scenario 1. The optimistic path, stabilization and recovery. In this scenario, the interim government, led by Delcy Rodriguez, successfully stabilizes the country. Economic reforms, with the help of international aid, begin to address the crisis. Venezuela reopens trade routes, attracting foreign investments. Oil revenues are used to rebuild the economy, and the people's suffering begins to ease. There is hope for a more democratic future, with free elections leading to a peaceful transition of power. Scenario 2, the middle ground, a fragile peace. This path sees some stabilization, but with a fragile peace. The interim government manages to hold power, but tensions remain high. US influence grows, but it comes at a cost. Venezuela becomes increasingly dependent on foreign powers. The military, divided but still powerful, continues to play a central role in governance. While the situation improves, it's clear that Venezuela's future is still uncertain, with pockets of unrest and growing dissatisfaction. Scenario 3, the pessimistic path, continued chaos. In this scenario, the political and economic situation deteriorates further. The interim government collapses under the pressure of internal divisions and external threats. The military takes control once again, but the country spirals deeper into authoritarian rule. Violence escalates as factions fight for power, and the people continue to suffer. The international community remains divided, with no clear resolution in sight. Venezuela becomes a failed state, with devastating consequences for the region. No matter which path Venezuela takes, the lessons from this crisis will be clear. The world must learn from what happened here, and we must understand how fragile power can be. Venezuela's crisis is a stark reminder of how quickly things can unravel. A nation once powerful and proud now faces an uncertain future. The fall of Nicolás Maduro is not just the loss of a leader, it's the unraveling of a system that failed its people. But there's a larger lesson here. In the end, power is fragile. It can be seized in a moment, and when it is, the consequences ripple far beyond the borders of one country. Venezuela's fate is a cautionary tale of what happens when a nation loses its way, when its people are forgotten, and when power is hoarded at the expense of the many. But it's not over. This crisis is far from the final chapter. The choices made in the coming months will determine the future of Venezuela and perhaps the future of the entire region. The world is watching. Will Venezuela rise from the ashes, or will it fall further into despair? It's up to the people of Venezuela and their leaders to decide how this story ends.